most of today has been a story of policy changes, of the transformation of financial regulatory reporting from disconnected documents into open data. Now, at the end of the day, we get to talk to those who have to do some of the nitty-gritty work. As this implementation happens, what will chief data officers be doing and thinking about? What are the challenges from those who know the difficulty of implementing data standards for existing reporting requirements? We're grateful for PwC's support of our organization and of today's event. And now I'd like to turn the floor over to a principal at PwC, Don McCrory, to take away our last panel. Don.
Yep, thanks, Hudson. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Don McCrory with PwC. We're a proud sponsor of the Data Transparency Coalition, and we always have a continued relationship with these guys. It's been very good, and we appreciate everything that Hudson's done for this panel. We are the last panel of today. We are the only thing between what Hudson described as cold beer and a glass of wine. I wrote that down, so thank you, Hudson. And for everybody that's been here all today, this panel will land the plane. So, little inside joke for anybody that's been here all day. So let me introduce the panel, starting with my immediate left and going down the panel here. We have Donna Roy, and Donna is the Executive Director of the National Information Exchange Model and the Head of Information Sharing at the Department of Homeland Security. Next to her is Linda Powell, and Linda is the Chief Data Officer. Oh, I'm sorry.
The other next to her.
We're interchangeable.
Yeah.
They switched on me. Next is Darrell Ashton. Darrell is the Data Management, Integration, and Dissemination Office for the Federal Reserve Board of Governors. And then Linda. Linda is the Chief Data Officer for the Consumer Finance Protection Bureau. And what we'll do today is have them a few minutes to talk a little bit about what they want to describe around data standards that they're working on, and then we'll have a Q&A right immediately after that. So we'll start with Donna. Do you want to talk a little?
I might be the only odd duck here because I don't come from a financial regulatory or a finance background. Most of my work is spent either working on the Homeland Security mission across the Homeland Security enterprise, which is with every federal agency, every state, local, tribal, international, private sector agency, so everyone but my Aunt May. And in that, data standards are a big deal. Or I'm working inside the agency to fix some big data or data standardization issues. And so I'll talk mostly about my external work because it is the one that I think applies mostly here. And so the National Information Exchange Model is a program that came out of a couple of maybe a handful of people who invented it. Now, I've met the handful, and it adds up to about 100 people. But the story is there was a handful of people who got together and decided they needed to exchange information across state boundaries in order to keep law enforcement officers safe and to increase the capability to enforce things like warrants. And so there was a handful of states that got together. They created a data model. They said, this sort of works. We can exchange driver's license data, warrant data, those types of things. That grew into what we now call the National Information Exchange Model, which covers more than justice. It covers everything from cyber to international trade to intelligence, almost everything around the Homeland Security and human services types of information. So I heard agriculture is going to use it for crop reporting, exchanging from fed to state, local, right? So this little pet project, this little groundswell up from the bottom, is the program that really talks to the need for standardization of information across jurisdictional boundaries in order to get better decision making, right? So how many people here have been stopped in a police car? Maybe you're going too fast, maybe you some of you are lying. There's more of you out there. I'll find out who, because I know people now. So this is the best use case. That police officer has about 15 minutes to figure out a lot of things about you. Are you a bad guy? Do you have a valid driver's license? Do you have a warrant? Are you a terrorist? on the watch list? Are you someone who we need to do something with? They have 15 minutes to do that. There are at least 50 databases times about 4 or 5 for each one of those queries, right? So he can't log into 50 states. He can't log into n number of databases, right? All of that happens in his car through one query. And those exchanges were decided by the community. They're governed by the community, and they're implemented through the community, right? So those are the types of things. Standards make community safer. And when you sort of extend that out to things like the sort of financial reporting, I think you'll see those same value propositions. Joe.
Okay, Ashton?
Okay, so I work within the newly formed Office of the Chief Data Officer at the Federal Reserve. We've only been in existence for about 2 years. Our Chief Data Officer, Micheline Casey, one of the first things she did is put together a data council, official board data council, around the area of data governance. And one of the things that we look at across the organization is data standards. And for me in particular, and the work that I do and the group that I lead, it's really poignant in 2 areas, not just the data that we collect from institutions that is part of our supervision and regulation authority, but also the data that we ingest from other providers, from other federal agencies, so that our researchers, our economists can do their work to assist with monetary policy. I don't know how many of you out there ingest data from multiple agencies, but trying to do that is an absolute nightmare because there are no standards across agencies. Well, I won't say there are none. There are very few standards across agencies. So one of the things that we want to try to do, starting within the board, is reaching out to those agencies. Okay, what standards can we put together? What can we do as one of the FFIEC agencies, and just looking at that small group working with the FDIC, the NCUA, the OCC, the CFPB, and I know I'm leaving somebody out. Anyway, but working with those agencies, because we share a ton of data. And one of the hardest things to do is say, okay, let me take your data, I've got my data, I need to integrate those together. I can't do that because we're not using any sort of data standard across the board. So it doesn't matter whether you're talking about financial data or national security data, standards are hugely important. So that's kind of the external view for us for data standards. Internally, trying to reduce the burden on our staff, because it's not just one particular area that goes out and says we want to collect data from institutions that we regulate. It's across the board in different business lines, and we realize that it is a burden, and part of our mandate is to reduce that burden on institutions that we collect data from. And the more standards that we can have internally, the more efficient we can be in that process, and reduce that burden, hopefully provide better, more high quality data to the public.
Hey, Linda?
Great. So I'll step back for just 1 minute, and I'll take this opportunity to provide some background information on the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, because we're a pretty new agency. We've only been around for 4 years. We were part of the financial legislation, the Dodd-Frank Act, that created the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, which I will lovingly refer to as the CFPB because it's too many words. So we were established to protect consumers as it relates to financial products. If you think about it for a minute, that's a pretty awesome mission. And I'll share with you all that I've been very lucky in my career over the last many years, more than I'll admit. I've had the great pleasure of being a public servant. I worked at the Federal Reserve, actually, with Darrell. And then I got the opportunity to work on financial stability for a couple of years with the Office of Financial Research. And now this is wonderful, being able to round out my public service in actually serving consumers as it relates to financial products. So whether an individual is trying to find a mortgage or looking for a credit card, part of our mission is ensuring that people have the information that they need to make good consumer decisions. And it's not just making sure that they have the information that they need, but making sure that they have information that they can understand. So I'm sure everybody here has had to look at either a prospectus or a credit card document or a mortgage document and has had questions about it. It's our mission to ensure that you have the information and it's understandable in a way that helps you to make your good financial decisions. We're also working on the other side of the coin to make sure that regs and guidance that we provide to financial institutions is well thought out and easy for them to understand, so that it's easier for these other companies to actually implement our regulations and guidance. The main mission of the CFPB, or the main things that we do, are we educate, we monitor, we research, we write rules, we supervise, and when necessary, we enforce. How does all of this work that we're doing relate to data and standards? It relates because in order to write good rules and regulation and supervision, we need data. We have to have information in order to make good decisions. Standards and sharing are critical. We share a lot of, as Darrell was just mentioning, we share a lot of information with the other agencies. There's a couple reasons for that. One is it reduces burden. Anytime Darrell collects data and it's helpful to me, rather than my going out and collecting the data, it's important that we share it, because that overall reduces burden to the financial industry. It also reduces burden on the regulator side, because it's not cheap and easy for us to collect data. So we're saving on both ends to the degree that we can share data. Standards that are universally adopted also help reduce burden, both for those who have to file information and for those who have to receive information, for exactly the same reasons that Donna and Darrell were talking about, that it makes it easier for information to flow through the financial ecosystem.
Okay, great. Now we'll go to a few questions. I'll start with a few questions for the panelists, and then I'll come out to the audience for a few questions. First question is for everyone, so I'll go down the line and ask you each sort of your thoughts on this. In general, what will be the impact to your organizations if the U.S. financial industry adopts searchable data standards for information that they collect? So depending on your specific expertise and your line of business that you're interested in, what do you see as the impact if those standards do become adopted? And I'll start with Donna.
Awesome. I think that Homeland Security has a bit of a nexus in the financial arena, mostly around terrorism and crimes where terrorism is either the source or the funding mechanism. And I'll just sort of give you an analogy. There are some of our analytical platforms, analytical processes, the way we do intelligence and try to derive information out of this data, that are horribly unbalanced. And I'll say we spend 80% of our time getting the data in the right format to do the analysis, and about 20% of the time doing the analysis, which doesn't make me sleep better at night, right? I want to flip that and say that the more standards that we can do, the better we can do around structuring data and being consistent with the semantics of the data as well as the structure of the data, so that the analytical engines behind terrorism or behind any one of our use cases can spend 80% of their time on the analysis and 20% on figuring out how to merge or correlate data across multiple sources. I don't think we're there yet. I think the federal government has pockets of excellence, but I think that the more standardization we can do across boundaries and across missions, the better we can work at flipping that process. So I run around saying my job is to increase the speed to intelligence really is, I think, the job for the Chief Data Officer, if there were one, in the Department of Homeland Security.
Darrell, the impact of the Board of Governors?
Yeah, I'll repeat kind of what I said in the beginning. The biggest one that I see is the burden for the institutions that have to report to us. With any standards, you can put packages together so that they're reporting either the same thing in the same way to their different regulators, or it reduces the burden on our staff because we know what we're going to get. We don't have to turn around after receiving data from institutions and say, no, try again, this is not what we wanted, which happens frequently. So it's a reduction of burden, number one, and I think the other part is we'll have some increased work product out in the private sector, because if we can provide standards across the agencies with the data that we release, yes, we've got tons of smart people working on the data that we collect, but the data that we release across agencies, there's tons of other people out there that can do really interesting work, whether it's in the academic world or just somebody sitting in their basement playing with data. There are kind of different ways to attack the problems, and the more we can, the better avenues that we can provide to everybody, not just the folks within the Federal Reserve, to work with data and integrate data and just play with data, really provides an impact to everybody, not just us.
Linda, go ahead.
Sure. I'll answer this slightly differently, but piggybacking on both of your themes, I like to think about how will this benefit both the private sector and the public sector in two different frameworks. One is a processing framework. How does data actually flow through the financial ecosystem? And then the other framework is an analytical framework. How can you analyze data more efficiently? So how can you spend 20% on the flow and 80% on the analysis? So I know some of you in the audience may have heard my analogy before, but I like to think about, in terms of the processing of the data flow through the ecosystem, if there's any Civil War buffs out there, you'll know that before the Civil War, the standard rail gauge did not exist. So there were multiple different sized rail gauges. So trains that were going from one part of the country to the other couldn't go just from one part of the country to the other. You would have one train would go out to Ohio, and then the rail gauge would change, and you'd have to have another train come and meet them in Ohio, and then you would unpack everything and move it to the next train so they could take it over a little further. The same thing happens with data. If you don't have standards that flow from the point where you're collecting the data to the point where you're disseminating or analyzing, what we do is we read the data in, we transform it, we make derivations to it, we normalize it, we'll do all sorts of transformations, and then we'll send it out again. And then somebody else reads what we've put out, takes it in, transforms it, does whatever changes they want, and sends it to the next person. So you end up with a lot of trains unloading and reloading. So think about if today you still had to change trains every time you went to Ohio. It would be quite a hassle. So the other side is analysis. And what I think is the most important issue that I'm thinking about these days in terms of analysis comes down to definitions and ensuring that we're using the same definitions when we're doing analysis. The financial example I like to give is capital and net worth. Are you talking about the same thing or not? And it depends on who you're working with about that. A more broad example would be if I were discussing my penultimate paper. If we didn't have Webster's dictionary to define penultimate sounds like it's really cool, it must be great, but it really means it's the next to last or the next to final. So my penultimate paper means I have more work to do as opposed to it's a really great paper. So ensuring that we, stop that, Hudson. So it's ensuring that we're all working off of a common dictionary so that the analysis is, one, easier to do, and two, is more accurate so that we know what we're all discussing.
Okay, good. Well, I have about 15 minutes. I could ask a few more, or do you want to go to the audience? Okay, the one question I'd ask for each of the panelists is, we talked about standard data definitions, getting to better transparency, the 80-20 rule. A lot of what I hear people talk about in data is sort of change management, or sort of the softer part of getting people interested in it, understanding it, embracing it, the challenges of people that don't want to embrace it. I would ask each of you, just sort of think in your own organization, things you've dealt with and what you're dealing with, about how do you sort of manage people in the process and the governance of data, and some of your perspectives on what works and what doesn't work. So I'll start with you.
Great. So I want to thank Hudson in this coalition because events like this help us raise the level of conversation. So I joined the Department of Homeland Security 8 years ago. It's a funny story. I took a job no one wanted. It was to be the chief data architect in enterprise data management. The job interview went something like this. No one wants the job. You have no money. You have no people. And the previous guy pretty much ruined the reputation for data, so no one wants to talk to you. But there's a free gym, and you'll get a parking spot. And I know your commute. This one would be better. And I'm like, oh, add me in. I'm in. Count me in. I'm in. And literally, it took me 3 or 4 months to get in with the CIO, who I theoretically reported to, and he kept saying, I don't want to talk to her. She's going to talk to me just about data stuff. And so I have seen the evolution of the conversations of data move significantly. I'm now one of the most, I would just say, when the phone rings and my name's on the other end, the leadership of the department picks it up because they understand I'm going to talk about the use of data, the value of data, how to catch terrorists with data, how do we sort of get through that data conversation. So I've gone from the basement or the below basement of the department of people who people want to work with to someone people really think they need to work with. So a lot of that is around the conversations that we have externally and the rise of the CDO and the rise of the importance of data and the analytics. I think we have a long way to go. If you, though, look in the federal agencies around the amount of funding we actually expend on things like data management. So as soon as you say the words data management, people zone right back out, right? So and then they put you in the basement and they don't want to talk to you anymore. And so I think we have to find creative ways to talk to the business owners about the problems you solve for them and just sneak in the data management stuff into the budget without them knowing it, right? So I think we still have a long way to go. And if you focus on the data analytics or the business problems you're trying to solve, they will talk to you and you will elevate that conversation. But we still have a long way to go on institutionalizing the way of doing this within agencies. The corporations that are making money are doing it. They're doing it really well. They're doing it and they're governing their data. We're doing it in pockets and we're governing it in pockets. And I think, I'd like to be someone like an American Express who I know is doing an awesome job with their data. But I don't think we're there yet at my department.
Okay, so the people side of things is something that is really kind of near and dear to our hearts in the Office of the Chief Data Officer, just because everybody comes to us with their data and says, here, you take it and make it better for me, which is always easier said than done. In fact, we had people come up to us after about a year in existence and say, so you haven't been around a year, why are we still having data problems? And so the people side is really trying to explain to them that this isn't a one-size-fits-all. It's not, hey, let me just run my magic program on it and your data is nice and clean and easy to use and there aren't going to be any issues. It really is a big sell to the business lines to say, you're going to need to be involved in this process with us. We'll help you come up with those standards. We'll help you come up with the policies, the governance around this, but your folks are going to need to do the work. And that's been a struggle. There needs to be real buy-in across the organization at the top level to say, okay, this stuff that we've sort of done for years in an ad hoc fashion, We need to have actual professionals do this and hold them accountable for it and say, this is your job. This isn't just a side part. I really liked what Donna was saying about once you start talking about data management, people just kind of tune out and don't pay attention. You know, they think it's this thing that just kind of happens, but you know, when you start saying, okay, let's talk about it, let's, you know, tell me what your needs are. Oh, no, I don't want to do that. Just make it nice for me. So it is something that we struggle with. What we've kind of worked through is we do have an executive data council at the Board of Governors, and it's across all of the business lines, whether we're talking about the research area, the supervision area, consumer affairs, even our business services area, so the folks who are dealing with the data on our HVAC system, right? I mean, same sorts of problems. We're not using it for monetary policy purposes, but it can still solve problems. And so they're all getting together finally and addressing the questions, what do we do, how do we do them, and what additional resources are needed to combat those. And what we're putting together is an enterprise data strategy that will say, here's where we are, here's where we need to be, and here's where how we're going to get there. Some of those things may be a year, some may be 2 years, some may be 5 years or more. And it addresses what are the resources, what are the buy-ins that we need from across the organization.
Linda?
So these are all important things. I've taken about 10 years ago, when I started boring everyone at cocktail parties, and I would go to the cafeteria and people would walk away from me. Oh, we'll go sit somewhere else. She's going to talk to me about data. I realized that I needed to take a different approach to things. And so when I went back to graduate school, I did not go back for my MBA, so I did not take the marketing classes that I wish I had taken. So I went to the local library and I took out a library's worth of marketing books and actually wrote a marketing plan for data at the Fed. How was I going to market this within my own agency? And what I came out with and what I try to do today is I tell stories. So my favorite example, because I think it worked the best, my ontology story doesn't go over very well, so I won't tell you that one. But 10 years ago, nobody knew what metadata was. I was one of the few people that I knew that actually uttered the word. So what I did was I took the Warhol picture of the Campbell soup can where the label is being ripped off, and I said, the soup is the data, the can is the database, and the label is the metadata. I said, but take it one step further. If you don't have metadata for your data warehouse, which 10, 15 years ago nobody did, picture your pantry with a whole bunch of cans in it, but you've ripped off all of the labels on your cans. So you walk into your pantry and you think, I want to have soup tonight, and you open the can and it might be a can of beans. I'm not going to starve to death, but I won't necessarily get what I want. I won't be able to follow the recipe very well because I won't know the exact size of the can. And if, God forbid, I have a food allergy, I wouldn't know how to address that. So that was what got me over the hump with the importance of metadata. And I found that particular story or analogy to be pretty effective going forward. These days I'm talking a lot about Maslow's hierarchy of needs and how everybody wants to be at least loving and belonging, which if you think about that in data management terms is probably the analytics phase. But you can't jump straight to analytics. You need to be able to have food and water and air, and you need to be safe that you're not getting eaten by grizzly bears before you can worry about love and belonging. So before you can worry about doing the data analytics, you have to worry about having a good data platform. You have to worry about having good metadata. You have to worry about having standards. Something that's particularly near and dear to my heart is you have to have really good security on your data. That is absolutely critical. And so you can't just jump over those bottom layers and go straight to analytics. So the way I have found most effective in talking to the business side is through stories and examples of what might make their lives better.
People can resonate with.
Yeah.
So, yep. Okay, I have one final question for the panel, and then we can go to questions. Very quickly, what kind of folks do you look for to hire in your organizations? Not everybody sets out from universities and career paths to be in data. It's a new incoming field. There are data degrees, but just curiosity. I hear people say all the time, where do you find people that want to work on data? And curious where you find people, the skills, what works, what's the most effective types of skills that you find that work in your organization?
This is a trap, because if I answer this, she's going to start using my methods. Please don't steal my people. Okay, so I look for critical thinking skills first, and I teach everything else. Interestingly enough, across my staff who do some of the biggest things that we're doing around data, I find a large number of visual artists, performing artists, musicians, and people not trained in IT. But they have a way of thinking that translates into the ability to leverage data for the business problems that we're facing today. So it is hard to do this through the federal system. But if you can find non-traditional hires or people who sort of see the world differently, I think that's the basis for what data science will end up sort of evolving towards. You know, it's either a mathematician, a statistician, someone who's brilliant on saxophone at night. You know, it's a mix of people, and critical thinking skills are the ones I think are the most critical to what we're doing in data today, since we're really evolving and at a crux of implementing big things within agencies, and not a lot of guardrails to get us there. So we seem to be inventing quite a bit in what we're doing. And for me, people who can invent with us are the ones that I want on my staff.
Good. Darrell?
Sure. So for me, in the data management area, I'm really looking for two different things. Technical skills are great, but I can teach technical skills, so that's not a huge concern for us. Most people don't come in with any real passion about data one way or the other, so again, we can kind of teach that and foster that. But the two things we're really looking for are problem solving, which is akin to critical thinking. People who like puzzles, it's one of the biggest things that we do kind of like a little bit of a test when we bring new people in, is we have puzzles all over our office. We have you know, actual puzzles, we have you know, mind teasers, chess sets out, just games, and we want to see, you know, who are people that look and gravitate toward those things, who are just looking for fun ways to solve problems. And then the other side is people who are creative, people who are innovative, who are constantly thinking differently. I'm not a big fan of the, you know, thinking outside the box term, but kind of in that realm, people who don't do things the same way that other people do. So a lot of those people are graphic designers, visual designers. They just tend to think differently. And those people are great. Again, I can teach them the data management stuff. I can hand them a Dimbach book and say, here, read this, and send them off to training. I can teach them the technical stuff, but it's the people who really like problem solving, who enjoy puzzles, and are very creative.
Yeah, there's not a whole lot I could add. I'll just say, Darrell, what's your background? Because Darrell's the perfect candidate.
Econ, math, and CS.
Yeah. So yeah, people who are curious also is another really important thing. I remember at one point there was a fellow I hired who, I think he was an econ undergraduate, had no computer science, but in the interview process it came out where he had created this incredible website for his mother's artwork and had to reiterate and reiterate and reiterate to get the pictures just right on the website for his mother. And we discussed a lot about the technology that he used to do it, and how he was, you know, deciding about whether or not the picture was accurately represented. And I thought, this is someone who's going to have a lot of pride in the data management and looking at how they run processes. And it ended up being a great hire.
Excellent. Well, now we'll go to the audience. So Hudson has a microphone. If we have any final questions, right here.
Hi, my name is Bernadette Highland from Three Round Stones. Hi, Donna. I have a question. I just came from another forum this morning where we were working in a roundtable forum to talk about specifically cultural roadblocks in government. And two issues came up, and I'm curious what your thoughts are. Government agencies or heads of government agencies don't want public scrutiny of agency data quality problems, and CISOs, Chief Information Security Officers, are primarily guys with a 20 or 30-year history in IT, and they have a need to know culture or mindset as opposed to a need to share. And it's going to just take them years to kind of make that cultural mindset change. What have you found effective?
I think
I didn't hear the
was the
question.
question
I didn't
around
hear all the questions.
certified information security officers and working with those folks?
There's lots of enthusiasm around open data. The issues are not technical. There are in fact standards to exchange data
Right.
on the web. We're doing a lot of it. But the problem is really cultural mindset amongst
yes.
chief information security officers
we
who
got-
their job is to stand
job
in the
is to keep
way
the
and to
data
protect
closed.
the agency from looking bad if they accidentally release data that's embarrassing. And that's not PII, that's nuclear power plants with the wrong lat long that are in the middle of the ocean. Stuff like that.
So I
That
think-
doesn't reflect well.
No, thank you. I think the question is how do you sort of deal with the paradigm between security of information and open data in your organization?
I love this challenge. This is why I will never be unemployed. I think there's in the info sharing world, which is where I spend 120% of my time, information sharing is not about technology, even though I work in the CIO shop. And the tech part is kind of fun, but I spend less than 5% of my time on that. I spend most of my time on understanding how to gain trust and automate as much trust as possible so that we can increase information sharing. So I use this analogy with my friends, the law enforcement crowd, the gun-toting, boot-wearing guys. There's a issue that we have culturally we've not been able to sort of drive a solution to. So Donna Roy, I could ask any one of you here for your credit card. Just give me your credit card, and while it's in my hand, you're going to freak out a little bit because you don't know me. And if I leave the room, you're going to freak out a lot, and you're probably going to call your bank, and you're going to cancel it because you don't know what I'm going to do, right? But you have a mechanism to stop inappropriate sharing or inappropriate use of that information. You have a accountability chain of trust. So let's go this other way. I'm a law enforcement guy. I could be federal FBI, I could be state and local. I'm incented to close cases. My career is all about getting credit for getting the bad guy, prosecuted, put in jail, and then I get promoted. So if I share information with someone else, and someone else gets the credit, gets the bad guy, or blows my bus, or something even worse, my career is like this. And guess what? I have no one to call. Like there's no, ooh, credit card company, take it back thing. There's no accountability. There's no ability for me to sort of understand how to undo that, right? He just gets screwed if inappropriate sharing happens and it ruins his career. And so those are the things that we really need to think about in the context of sharing. And so that's why people hold their data. And when they hold their data, if you drill into it, there's usually a very, very good reason why they're not sharing innately, right? You're not going to give me your credit card because you don't want me buying something, right? So they're not going to give their data because there's something there that's going to prevent them. There's no incentive system, or if there's an incentive system, there's no accountability for inappropriate use on the other side. And so when we talk about governance and sharing, we sort of weigh that sharing and safeguarding, right? You can safeguard it, but the inappropriate sharing conversation still needs to happen, and we still need to find mechanisms to keep people incented to share that overcome some of the things that may happen when data is misused.
Darrell, thank you. Darrell?
Yeah, so I'll talk a little bit just about the cultural part. So we encounter this a lot. I think it's very, very apt to say that most information security officers, if given the option, would say no data sharing at all. But one of the things that we're doing through our data governance program is saying, okay, that can't be the default answer for everything. You have to say why. And then from that, we need to develop policies around, okay, for this type of data, this sort of sharing is okay. For that type of data, this sort of sharing is okay. And then, being able to categorize those and say, okay, here are the security measures that need to be in place based on those categories of data. And so that you move away from this default no sharing unless you prove to me that we need to, and move more into the let's make it open until you can prove to me otherwise that it shouldn't be.
Because they're worried about their data going into the wild, right, and never coming back, right? And there's no accountability for that, right?
Yeah, it's a huge risk for them, because if there's a leak, right, they're the ones that everybody turns to and says, how did you allow this? So I understand the concern, but it is a cultural shift that needs to occur across a lot of agencies.
So I think there's two layers of sharing, and I think your question, so the first layer would be sharing, I'll say confidentially, so the Fed and the CFPB sharing information that for a variety of reasons can't be released to the public, normally because there's personal information that would either harm a company or an individual would not want released. But beyond that, I think your question was more related to making data open and available to the public. So there's a couple different layers there. The first is ensuring that information that you've been given and entrusted with that is confidential remains confidential. And that's where I've worked with the security officers the most, and that's where they're the most interested. When it comes to data that can be released to the public, I haven't encountered as much of the mindset of, oh, you have? Okay.
Oh, yeah. I think our open data initiative encounters this on a regular basis. If the public gets my information, they will measure me inappropriately on the standards for which I'm doing my job, therefore I'm not giving it up. Scientists won't publish their information even though they collected it because they don't want someone else using it before they publish their paper. Mm-hmm. So again, there's this incentive that you sort of need to get to sort of open that conversation with someone, why not, right? And so there's a lot of fear even in the open data for releasing data. If I show you the wait times at the airport, then you're going to say, I don't have enough staff there, or I have too many staff there, or someone on the Hill is going to notice that perhaps I'm overfunded or underfunded, or I'm not applying. I've heard it all. And there are certainly cultural barriers to that. I think there are ways to address it, but I think you're shaking your head, so I think you've run into some of these as well.
Well, I think we're out of time. I want to thank the panelists for the great discussion and appreciate your presentations today. And I'll turn it back over to Hudson. So thank you.